everybody, it's Emily from Life So Savory, and today I'm going to be taking you from kind of start to cutting out your fabric, showing you how to use PDF patterns, specifically my free patterns, and just how you access them, how you assemble them, get you started sewing. And I know there's a lot of you who watch and say, oh, I wish I could sew, and my thought is you can. So that's what I'm going to be doing today, and just showing you how to get started sewing, and also talking about my brand new free pattern, which is this super cute girls pattern. I'm loving the photos that I got of Rose wearing it, and anyway, so that's what we're doing today. Hey Tracy. Around and show you first my cutting table, because there were just some requests about that, and then also I'm going to zoom in on the computer, and so you won't see me for a few minutes, but you will see the computer, and then when we get to printing and assembling, I'll switch it back to me. Okay, but I want you to be able to see what I'm doing on the computer to go from there. So we are going to reverse the camera first to show you my cutting table. So, oh, and now it's flipped back. Okay, so my cutting table is 4 small IKEA kitchen cabinets that I bought and assembled. So, and they're the narrow ones because if I bought the wide ones, putting them together in the middle, these 2 desktops would not have been wide enough, and I didn't want to spend money on a countertop. So those are actually just cheap IKEA desktops, and when I mean cheap, I think they're like $20 each. So my plan is that as they get scuffed and they don't look so nice, that I'll just replace them because they're actually so affordable to use. So that's it's counter height, which I love because they're kitchen counters. And then we just stuck this little IKEA storage thing, or maybe it's from Target thing, in the middle, and that's my daughter's art projects. So I know many of you have seen my post on my blog I did about my sewing room, but it's actually our front room, and so the kids' play area is there, my cutting, some storage, and then my sewing area is right there. So I have to keep it fairly neat because it's actually right in the middle of when you walk in the door. It's like the first thing you see in our house. So okay. So that's what I've got for cutting table and sewing space. And again, if you want to see more details, you can just go to lifesosavory.com and search, if you search my new sewing room, I showed you pictures, more pictures. So, all right, so here on my site, oh, here's actually showing up today in the top 5 posts so if you haven't been to my site, it's Life So Savory. And sewing is all under this tab. Sewing for kids, baby, women, sewing home decor and accessories, free PDF patterns. This is where I put all my new free patterns that, make sure you can see that you might want to see. So those are where the freebies go, including this newest one here. And then I just was also noticing that on the side here is the top 4 posts of the week, like what's trending on my site. And the women's long sleeve tee, which is what I'm wearing right now, is one of the popular posts. So you can see in this, maybe you can't see in the picture, but if you click to my site and look at it, you'll see that it's actually a pretty high neckline. So I lowered it for the one that I'm wearing today. So let's take a look at, this is what we're gonna print. The girls' sweatshirt tunic. So there is my adorable little daughter wearing this tunic, okay? And then I've got all the, generally on most of my PDF patterns, they follow a similar format. So I tell you about the pattern, I show you some pictures, usually some posed kind of final official pictures of what they look like. Here's the back, and I talk about that you don't need a lot of stretch because you can just open the back, and that's how you can get it over the head. And then I show you more pictures of my daughter because I think she's adorable and I loved how the tunic turned out. And then I talk about how she's also wearing my free legging pattern, and you can download that there. And then I have ads on my site which help pay for these free patterns. And then we get to this little button that says download, print the free PDF pattern from Craftsy. Click here. So this is what you want to look for when you're on my site and you want to download a pattern. You need to look for this button on the newer patterns, and the older patterns, it might look a little bit different, but definitely on the newer patterns, this is the button that I'm using for all my patterns. So then you're going to click that, okay, and you're going to come over to Craftsy, and if you don't have an account, it just needs your email, and it's a free setup to do an account. And the thing I like about using Craftsy for me is it's a great place to host my patterns. I don't have to then deal with the downloading and all that from my site, but you can also then save patterns, and so you can have a whole list of patterns that you've saved that you know you want to come back to, and it will catalog them for you right on the Craftsy site. Okay, so it is free. Okay, so that one says free right there. So the thing that you're going to do is add to cart. Now, you haven't finished yet, so if you want to go and get other patterns, or classes, or fabric, or thread, you can, do all that shopping when you're on Craftsy, and then so you can either hit continue shopping or you can proceed to checkout. And we're going to check out because we're going to grab this free pattern. And so it says looking for your patterns, find your classes and your patterns in your account menu. So that's what I mean by it will save all those for you. So here, our order is placed, subtotal is free, shipping is free, the total is free. So just because it says checkout, don't get worried that you're going to have to pay for something. At least for this pattern, you're not. Okay, obviously there are patterns for sale on Craftsy, but this is not one of them. So you can either print your receipt, or you can now go over here to this red button where it says download pattern. Okay, so now it'll say if your download doesn't start automatically, hit that button. Now this downloaded automatically, and here is the PDF, what it looks like on this pattern. So just a couple of tips I'm going to give you in general about printing PDF patterns, whether it's mine or any other PDF pattern. There's a couple things you want to look for. One is if you don't have Adobe PDF Viewer, let me see, what does it look like on my, too many tabs open. If you don't have, what is this called? This, okay. What does it look like here? Oh, Acrobat Reader. If you don't have Acrobat Reader installed on your computer, you're going to want to do that, because if you don't, it'll use the web-based version, and the web-based version often prints things not the correct size. So you want to make sure you've actually downloaded the pattern to your computer and you've opened it using a program on your computer. I also recommend only printing from a laptop or a desktop. Sometimes if you print from a mobile device, such as a phone or an iPad, it also doesn't allow you to set the settings correctly, and you also might not print it correctly. So you always want to check after you print that this 1-inch test square is indeed 1 inch. So if you only want to start by printing the first page and then measure that, you could do that. Okay, so my free patterns have a couple of things. One, it'll give you the name, the sizes, it says it's a free sewing pattern, and it'll also give you the link to the full photo tutorial. And you can click from your computer, you should be able to click directly on this link. Okay, so I can click it and it says, do you trust LifeSewSavory.com? If you do, click allow. I, of course, do trust it. And, oh no! And now it says it's not found. So I might have to go edit that pattern when I'm done. What? The link must not be correct. Okay, so good thing I did that today. I found a mistake. Girls sweatshirt, tunic, Life So Savory. I don't know what's different. Anyway, so I'll have to go look and fix that link. Oh, you know what? I spelled pattern wrong. It only has one T on here, and it should have two. Okay, so I'll fix that and then re-upload that onto Craftsy. But just know if you do print this version that in order to find the pattern, you need two T's in pattern. All right, and then this one also gives you what you need. So it says you need a 1/2 yard to 1 yard of sweatshirt or French terry fabric. You can also use whatever you want. Those are just my suggested fabrics. You need 1 inch of elastic thread, a 1/4 yard of ribbed knit, and 1 tiny button. So the elastic thread and the tiny button are for this back closure. Looks like I've got a few more threads to clip. Okay, so now let's move on to the printing. So you've downloaded it, you're opening it on your computer or your desktop if you have one. If you don't, you'll have to work around that. But if you only have an iPad, you'll have to figure out how that looks. And then you can click the link or you can copy and paste it to get the photo tutorial. So my patterns, the reason that they are free is because the pattern is only the pattern pieces. When you buy a pattern, like one you spend money on, generally it will have the pattern pieces and the instructions in this downloadable file. Okay, so in this downloadable file, it would have all the instructions if it was a pattern you paid for. The reason I make mine free is because I want you to come over to my website, click through to this, and then I make money off the ads on my site. And so that allows me to offer you free patterns as long as you just come here for the instructions. So you'll see here, which we'll go through this later, but here's the layout after you print it. That's what it should look like. And then I've got all the directions for putting it together right here on my website. Okay? And I just sew with my computer next to me and use the instructions. Hey, Alicia. Yeah, so I just use these instructions for putting it together, and I just scroll right on my computer. I don't print these instructions as I'm going. So, and then there shows you how to put it all together. Okay? So let's print it, and then we'll put it together. So you're going to want to hit print, and then there's just a couple things I'll show you on this part, and then we'll flip it back around. So I want to print all the pages, so there's 8 pages, and then the most important thing is that you print at actual size or 100%. Either one will be the same, but do not hit fit, do not hit shrink. You need to be on actual size or the 100%. And I always like to have my orientation on the auto portrait landscape. For me, that's the way it works best. But if you want to set portrait or landscape, if that works for you, then you can go ahead and do that. So this is your print preview. My old printer always used to cut off this bottom line, and I just was still able to make it work and figure out how to print it. But different printers print differently, so it's not necessarily a pattern issue if your printer's not printing it correctly. So my tip is to just print at actual size and use the auto portrait landscape and then go from there. And these patterns work on both A4 and letter size paper for those of you not in the US who use A4 paper. All right, so we're gonna hit print. And then while that's printing, I'm gonna switch this back around so you can see me. And then we'll reverse the camera again. Oops. See if I can do this. Okay, so now we're ready. I'm printing the 8 pages. And when we moved, I upgraded to a laser printer instead of an inkjet. So it prints really fast. And I love it. But then I'll show you how to assemble it. And there are many ways to assemble it. If you Google assembling PDF patterns, you'll find many, many, many tutorials on how to do this. I'm just gonna give you the way I generally do it. But there are so many ways. This is definitely not the only way. So if you don't really like my technique, you can totally do it differently. And again, we are assembling the pattern for this little tunic number here. So You need paper scissors or a paper cutter. I just like to use scissors, but I know a lot of people just use a slicer. And then you need tape. And I keep both paper scissors and fabric scissors at my sewing desk to be able to put that together. So let's scoot this back and lower this a little bit so you can see what I'm assembling here. Okay, so this is only 8 pieces, but the numbers are on the pattern. And also, I'll bring this back. If you are confused about assembling the pattern, most of my free patterns and all paid patterns, whether from me or other designers, will show you the layout, how it looks. So you can see it's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 directly under, and that's how we're going to tape it together. So that is the layout. So if you're confused, you can usually find a layout guide somewhere on the pattern, regardless of what kind of PDF pattern it is. Okay, so that is not what I wanted to do. All right, so I like to trim my patterns. You actually don't have to. You can just tape it together, and I know some people hold it up to the window because I'll show you why. So there's an overlap here on where these patterns will fit. So if you don't want to trim them, what you can do is just hold it up to a window and then tape it, and you can see better. So I don't mind trimming a little bit because what I do, and I'll show you after, is I tape the pattern together and then I keep this pattern and I just trace the size I want on tissue paper. So I'm only taping this together once. It's not like I'm going to be taping these together every time I want to use it. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I like to cut a few sheets of paper at the same time. I'm going to cut the right side of all numbers 1, 2, and 3 off. And then what I can do is here's 4. So I just lay out 4, and then I can put 3, and then 2, and then 1, and they're all overlapped and ready to tape. Big patterns, like women's patterns or more intricate patterns that can be 20, 30 pages, I don't love. My kids' patterns, of course, tend to be less pages because the pattern pieces are smaller. But if it's larger, I will do this on the floor. The other thing I will do is tape until I see a finished pattern piece. So like right now I can see that this is the finished sleeve right here. So if you're getting so many pieces, and it's ridiculous. I'll say it myself. It's ridiculous to tape 30 sheets of paper together at the same time. I'll just start cutting out those pattern pieces and putting them to the side, cutting up with the largest size so I can use all the sizes. And then I don't have a huge piece of pattern because I'm just, as I finish taping a single sleeve or a single top, whatever the pattern pieces are, front, back, I'll just start cutting those and setting those to the side. So, okay, so here we've now taped 1, 2, 3, and 4 together. Okay, and this is only an 8-page pattern, so it's nice and simple. So we have 5, 6, 7, 8 that go directly under 1, 2, 3, 4. Now on the second row, I also need to cut off the top so that overlaps. So on this one, I'm going to cut off the top. Okay, and then I'm going to cut off the left side. You can do the left or the right side of the 3 pages. So I don't find cutting too bothersome, simply because the way I'm doing it, it's pretty mass produced on the cutting. So now we can tape 5 under 1, and you've got these notches. Some patterns have letters, but there's usually almost always something to line up to make sure that you are doing it correctly. Okay, and so on these pieces, you have to line up both the top and the sides, right? Because it's not just a single row. This is the worst tape ever. It doesn't cut. Ugh. I should just buy new refills, but I'm like trying to use this tape up. Okay, so now with this piece, I finished both the front and the back of my tunic. So again, if I was cutting out a large pattern, I would just start trimming these pieces off so I don't have 30 pages of paper all taped together at one time, because that's just a ridiculously large thing to be moving around. But for me, this is it. We're on the last sheet, so it's not such a big deal. Some common questions are, do my patterns have layers? At this time, no, they do not. So you have to print off all the sizes. A lot of pattern makers are going to now where you don't have to print all the sizes. So you could just choose, I want to print 4T, and then it would only print the size 4 for you. I personally, like I said, I just print this once and then I save the pattern. I cut apart the pattern pieces and then I save these in folders and binders, and then I have them and just continue to trace the size that I want. So up to you, personal preference. I know that people say, waste ink when you have to print all the sizes. And yes, there is a little bit of wasted ink, but my lines are pretty thin. So here's the front of the tunic, and I just kind of roughly cut it out, and then that's how I'll save it. Just like that. So I'm just gonna cut apart these pattern pieces, and then I need to get new, I'll show you how I store them. New plastic, I'm out of the plastic sleeves. Well, maybe I might have some down in our living room, but I'm out up here of the plastic sleeves I used to sew. So I like to put, yes, Linda, so I tape them together because now I have complete pattern pieces. So now I'm not cutting them apart by page, I'm cutting them apart by pattern piece. So the back of this tunic needs 3 pieces to be one pattern. And then in here are the 5 different sizes, and you can trace or cut out the size that you want. Just like a paper pattern has multiple sizes printed on a piece of paper, and you either cut apart or trace the size that you actually want to sew. The size key is on the pattern piece, so you won't lose it. Also, the chart, the size chart, is that the size chart? Yeah. So what size should you make depending on what size your child measures are also on this piece. So I'm not going to cut, I like to keep this information on the side here, so I'm not going to cut around this part of the pattern. Okay, and then here's the sleeve. And then here's the bottom band piece. And it's just a rectangle, but it does have some different widths. Okay, so those pieces put together make this little tunic. Okay, so that is what we would be sewing if we did that. But we are actually going to move to a different pattern now, simply because I don't want to make another tunic right now. So I'm going to clean up those paper scraps, and then I'm going to show you the next step. This is how I do it. There are many ways to do this. This is how I do it. So I store my cut apart pattern pieces in plastic folders like this. In these, oh goodness, I just knocked some things over. In these sort of things. Okay, so this is how I store my patterns, and then I can just flip through and find which one I need. And I do need a few more of these plastic sleeves, but that's how I put them in. Hey Mary, you'll be able to watch from the beginning when I'm finished. Okay, so I will need a plastic sleeve to put this new one in that we just printed. And I just knocked over all my pens and markers. Okay, so we're gonna move, like I said, to a different pattern because I actually need to sew more of these. This is my Sweet Rose dress pattern, and I'm making 3 of these for my sister's girls. So I'm gonna trace a different size. This was this baby size that I made. I sewed that live on Wednesday. You can find it on my Facebook page if you want. But we're gonna trace the next size. And so I'm gonna show you now how I do the tracing. You're welcome, Barbara. So again, here are the pattern pieces cut apart just very roughly. Okay, so you can see I didn't cut out on the lines. I'm just making it smaller so that I can fold it up and put it in those plastic sleeves and kind of see individual pattern pieces. Okay, so that's why I have it cut apart. So then what I do is I take really cheap tissue paper, and I've given you in the description of this video the link to Amazon where I order it, and it's like 1,000 sheets for $5 or something. It's really a cheap way for me to be able to trace and then throw away. I do not keep the sizes that I trace onto the tissue paper. So I can just do it. I'm able to see fine just putting it on my cutting table with my overhead light, but if you cannot see to trace, then you would want to hold this up to a window, and then you could trace on there. Again, many ways to do this. This is just how I do it. So we're gonna cut out the, I'm trying to think what size I should make. We're gonna cut out the 4T for my next niece. And so I'm looking here on this dress, the key, right? It shows you what the lines look like for each size. So I wanna find the one that's 4, which is the tiny dotted lines. And then I'm gonna trace that onto the corner of this tissue paper. And you also wanna make sure that you transfer any pattern markings such as fold lines or direction of stretch, any of those things that you think you might need when you're cutting out the pattern. Transfer them, and then I just write what pattern piece it is. So it's the back, the grain line needs to go that way, and then here's the fold line for making the button placket. Okay, so you can see here I've traced the first piece. Okay, so I won't do all of these, we'll just do a couple. So here's the front. Trace that one. Again, we're using the same size. This one says to cut on the fold, so we'll do that. And we're just gonna trace a couple of these, and then I'll cut out a couple pieces because I don't always show the cutting part of sewing, because generally that's not very exciting. But today we're talking about all the behind the things, not very exciting things. So we'll make it that. And then here's my, oh, that's a good idea, Gertrude. Here's my front, and then I just indicated over here that it's gonna be cut on a fold line with my little markings. So you can do your own markings. And then this pattern doesn't have a skirt pattern pieces because they're just rectangles, but what it does show you is a skirt cutting guide. So you can use this chart to show you how long to cut your skirt pieces. Okay, so I saved this piece because this has the size chart and all this, and I would put this on the front of my plastic sleeve, and then I can see what pattern I'm looking at when I'm looking through my patterns to try to find which one I'm going to be sewing next. Okay, so we're going to trace the sleeve, and then we'll cut those out, and I'll cut out with some fabric. And then you can ask if you have any cutting questions. Pattern weights would be a great idea for keeping this. And you know what? I will admit I don't even own any pattern weights. And I know they're easy to make. I know a lot of people just make them, but it's something I have never sewn with. This Sweet Rose dress has options for short and long sleeve. I'm making the long sleeve, so I'm tracing all the way down, and this is a very wide sleeve because it has a gathered wrist. Okay, so you can see on this finished one that I gathered the wrist, and so that's why it's such a wide sleeve to begin with. Okay, so well, I'm going to trace. There's only one more pattern piece, so I'm just going to trace it, and then I'm done. And then the last piece for this pattern is the facing that goes with the neck. I know, Gertrude, that's what I've seen everyone make theirs out of, and some people put really cute like ribbons on it or fabric, and they look so great. So I do need to do this. Now this pattern piece is a little trickier because it's tiny and everything's overlapped. So make sure I trace the right lines. But I'll show you. So you can see on pieces like this where, you know, we've got a lot going on there that we have to make sure print the right thing. And then I'm just going to mark the fold. And I like to use a marker to trace. And so I just happen to have these calligraphy ones, which is probably not the intended use of them, but what it is. So now I can fold up these pattern pieces, and then they'll go back in that plastic sleeve. And then I put this one on top that kind of is the name and all the instructions to go with it. Okay, so I would just slide that in a sleeve, tuck it in my box, and then next time I want to sew this dress, I have all the sizes printed out, and I just have to trace the size that I want. So back to this size, paper scissors, not fabric scissors. I cut out, this is again the 4T size. I'm going to cut out these out of paper, and then I will be able to pin them onto my fabric and cut them out of the fabric. And once it might seem like this is quite the process, but honestly, once you've done it a few times, it really does go quickly, especially for kids' clothes, that the pattern pieces aren't all that big and not that hard to use. So on the sleeve, this sleeve has a front and a back. So I did mark the front and back of the sleeve. So that when I transfer it to the fabric, I'll be able to transfer those markings as well. I had one person sew this pattern, and she shared the pictures in our Facebook group, which if you're not part of that group, I would love for you to request to join. I'll hit accept on all of those when I'm done with this. What size is my tissue paper? Okay. Hey Kathleen, let me just grab I think I have an unopened package, so I can just show you. Oh, you know what? I said Amazon, but this is actually another really cheap place to buy tissue paper is Costco at Christmas. Gift tissue. Look at this massive thing. I haven't even opened this. What, Rose? Hit the OK button, the middle one. The middle one. So this is 400 sheets. Yeah. Just point it up. 400 sheets. I think it was like $5, and it says they're 20 by 24 inches. So I think the same as what I have here. And you're right. For big pattern pieces, you do still need to tape this together. So here is my Costco, but the link that I have in this video is this pretty much the same thing on Amazon, but I happen to be at Costco over Christmas. What am I gonna do? Where am I gonna store all this tissue? But this is my last piece of the Amazon order, so I will need to open this one up soon. So I think it's kind of standard tissue size that I've used, and you could probably buy bigger sheets, but I don't want to spend money on something that's not standard. I know some people also use freezer paper to trace their patterns onto. It's a little bit stiffer, so if you knew you were going to be saving those, then you could use freezer paper. I throw these away as soon as I'm done with this size, and then I just save the paper to trace and print next time. So that is totally my personal system. I know there's lots of different systems, so that's just mine. All right, so we're almost done cutting this out. And then I'll stand up and grab the fabric and just show you real quick how I would cut these out. So the pattern pieces usually are marked with either grain line markings. This is for woven fabric, or on this one, we have the stretch markings, which means the greatest amount of stretch should go this direction, okay? Knit fabric. I get my knit fabric all over. I love to reuse old pieces of clothing. And like I mentioned on this one, the flower fabric is reused from a different shirt that my daughter already outgrew. And I just cut the sleeves out of the main part of that other shirt so I could reuse that. So I reuse a lot of my husband's t-shirts for kids' pajamas. This is like weird lighting today. For kids' pajamas, I reuse a lot of my husband's t-shirts. I also just stock the sales really on fabric.com for knit. And usually I can get pretty good knit for around $6 or $7, sometimes even cheaper if there's a sale. And the good thing about apparel fabric is that it's 60 wide. So you really do get a lot of fabric for, I think, for the cost. So this is just 1 yard of this kitty cat fabric, but look at how wide it is, and I've actually even cut out part of it. So there's a lot of fabric here for just 1 yard. I could definitely make a couple t-shirts or t-shirt and leggings or a pajama set. So usually apparel knit is 60 wide, which means you're getting quite a lot of fabric, whereas quilting cotton is only like, 42 or 44 inches wide. So there's a lot more in there. So, while I have this knit out, let me just show you. So generally the stretch runs along the direction that this fabric was rolled on the bolt. So you have your selvage edge, which usually is printed, and then you have your cut edge where they cut the fabric when they sold it to you, okay? And so when you're looking at direction of stretch, generally the most direction of stretch is away from the selvage edge, is pulled apart. So here's the selvage edge, and you can definitely see that this way the fabric stretches a lot more than it does this way. This is a 4-way stretch, but when I just tug on it, it definitely stretches more this way. So if I was cutting out t-shirts or this sleeve, I would put this direction of stretch arrow going with the direction of the greatest stretch, okay? Now, we're not cutting out something from knit, we're cutting out from flannel for this, but it's generally the same rule where the grain line is going not perpendicular, perpendicular to the selvage edge, not parallel to the selvage edge. So let me just make a little more space here and scoot this back so you can see me and the cutting table. But this is a lot of flannel, and the reason it's a lot of flannel is because I'm making 3 of these dresses. So I made the tiniest one on Wednesday live, and now we'll move on to the next one. So here is that selvage edge. You can see the print on here. This is, again, like I mentioned on Wednesday, from Joann's. I went Black Friday shopping at Joann's, and this fabric was $2 a yard. So how could I pass up buying it? So $2 a yard, and I can get pretty much one dress from each yard, maybe a yard and a half, which means essentially you're making a dress for $3. Not counting my time, which my time's actually worth a lot, which is why I don't sell these clothes, because then I'd have to charge you an arm and a leg. But when I'm making them for gifts, it really is cheap way to do this. So, okay, so we're gonna start by cutting the front piece, and it needs to be on the fold. So here is the selvage edge, the one that doesn't have the printing on it, but I can definitely tell it's factory edge, not a cut edge. And I want to go with the grain line going, again, perpendicular to that edge. So I'm going to fold this over so I can cut it on the fold, and then make sure my fold lines up on the fold, and then the rest of the fabric there. So I know a lot of people, again, use fabric weights and their rotary cutter for cutting out everything. I pretty much still only use my rotary cutter for straight lines. I just haven't gotten into cutting everything with it. So I pin and cut with scissors. I'm old school like that. But again, I don't mass produce anything. If I was sewing and cutting and mass producing things, I would have to, of course, do a faster way. But I just sew for my kids, and I sew 1 or 2 of everything I design. So for the tutorial, and that's usually all I sew. I do not, people say, why don't you sell your designs, or why don't you sell your clothes? And I say, oh, I really, really do not love sewing the same thing multiple times. It's just not my favorite. So I sew it once or twice, and then I'm done. Even this one now, where I'm making 3 of these, I'm like, oh, that's so many of the same thing. I know, Alicia. I need one of you guys to do a video on how you use your rotary cutter for everything. I just am too afraid I'd cut it all to bits. I don't know. It's just, I haven't worked on it. I haven't practiced it. And I, of course, always say sewing is about practice. So I probably, if I really want to do it, should take my own advice and actually practice using the rotary cutter. But I don't. So I just get a sharp pair of sewing scissors and cut it. Okay, so this one is not on the fold, so we have 2 pieces there. And I just, these kind of useless bits, I trim as I go, and in fact this whole chunk here is not really going to be enough to cut anything out for this pattern. Okay, so now we'll cut the sleeves, which need to cut 2 of them, and we need to cut a left and a right. So the patterns usually say for sleeves, either cut on the fold. You have all the sizes. That's true. I don't have little ones. Sleeves usually either say cut 2 on the fold or cut 2 in mirror. And when they say in mirror, what they mean is you need a right side and a left side. And the one way to get that, very easily cutting 2 together, is just make sure you have either the rights of the fabric together or the wrongs of the fabric together, that you don't have the 2 rights facing up or the 2 wrongs facing up. If you do that, you'll end up with 2 left sides or 2 right sides instead of 1 of each. So I've just taken my fabric and folded it over, and I'm going to cut out 2 sleeves at one time, and because of folding a right side to a right side, I will now have a left and a right of my sleeve. And then before I unpin this, I'll just want to make sure that I mark which is the back side of the sleeve and which is the front side of the sleeve. So I'm just smoothing my tissue paper now that it's a little bit bigger pattern piece, smoothing my tissue paper out as I pin it. And you could do more pins, especially if you're just starting. I'd recommend putting quite a few pins or pattern weights on your paper. But again, I've sewed this pattern quite a few times, and these straight lines don't really bother me. Okay, so now we have 2 sleeves. And then besides the skirt, which I'm not gonna cut out right now, I just have this one last little cut on the fold, this neck interfacing, which is kind of an awkward shape. But this one little part needs to be on the fold, and then the rest just curves around. And it's a weird shape, but it fits perfectly on the neckline after you cut it out. So so now we have the neck facing as well. So then all I would do is I would look at this pattern, and I would see for the 4T, I want to cut a 16-inch long skirt, and I like to cut it the width of fabric, and the width of fabric meaning from selvage edge to selvage edge. So I fold my fabric, and I'll keep this because I need to make one more bodice, but I'll go down here to where the fabric is the full width, and then I'll just cut 2 pieces 16 inches long, and then the width of fabric wide, usually folded in half or even in quarters to chunk those 16 inches, and then I'll have my skirt done. And then that's how I cut out my pattern. So again, with knits, it's similar. You just have to be aware of the direction of stretch, but it works out the same. So yes, true. Anyway, so are there any questions about printing, assembling, or cutting out patterns that I can answer for you before I go? Last chance to ask questions live. If questions are asked later, I can answer them via typing the answer, but this would be your kind of last chance to ask questions when I can answer them right here while I'm here. I need to go downstairs and get more of those plastic sleeves. Anyone? Anyone? All right, if you do think of questions, please just ask the answer right here on the video, and I'll check back later, and then I can ask those. You can also try to tag me in the video, and I will probably edit this down a little bit and then upload it to YouTube so I can refer people here if they have questions about printing or assembling patterns in the future. So I'm glad you joined me today. I know we didn't make a project, but I did show off 2 projects that I've made recently with the sweatshirt and the dress, and also this top, which I made for myself. So you can still be inspired to sew. And yeah, I'm glad you joined me today. I will be back on next Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern time with another sewing tutorial. And Gertrude, blessings for you. I'm going to assemble a 30-page pattern. Do it on the floor. And I always love to cut those pieces apart as I get them. So yes, Alicia, you will love the sweatshirt. How old is your little one that you're sewing for, Alicia? I can't remember. But I know you do make a lot of the patterns, and I always appreciate when you guys share the photos of what you make, because then other people get inspired. They're like, oh, I could do that if she could do it. When I make things, people are like, oh yeah, she can make anything. But when you guys make it and share those pictures, I feel like it really is inspiring. So if you're not part of my pattern group, please, please, please join now, and I will just accept those requests when you're done. So yay, 7, Alicia. Okay, well, you might have to lengthen the tunic a little bit, because right now it is only graded to size 5, but if she's thinner, I'm sure you could just lengthen it and it would be super cute. So anyway, thank you for joining me. We'll see you next time. I hope you have a great weekend, and I'll see you back here next week. Bye.